Hey, Stevie Nutty here, doing the Junkyard Crawl with help from our friends at High Octane Classics in Auburn, Massachusetts. Thanks, guys. And this is the story of the 1960 Rambler. Now, we got to remember that the name Rambler was first used between 1902 and 1913 on a little buggy, an early runabout automobile made by the Thomas Jeffrey Automobile Company, the same company that in World War I built the Jeffrey Quad, one of the first all-wheel drive trucks that really helped to win World War I. Now, 1950, Nash revived the Rambler name on the compact car. And again, the Nash Rambler was a compact car all the way through 1956. Well, 1956-57 saw the merger of Nash and Hudson, and Nash changed its name to Rambler in 1958. And all American Motors, well, actually Rambler products, all cars were called Ramblers from 1958 on till 1969, I think it was. So what we have here is a trio of 1960 Ramblers. These are classics, full-size cars, not being confused with the Rambler American, which was downsized. But something we see that's kind of weird, again, the grills are all specific to 1960 with the freestanding marquee style R-A-M-B-L-E-R letters. Kind of tasteful and classy for an inexpensive car. But notice the quad headlights here and the single headlights here. Again, a 7-inch light and 5 inches on those. Well, for $23.50, you could order your Rambler with quad lights or single lights if you're a cheapskate. Some folks actually believe they'd save money replacing 2 headlights instead of 4. I mean, that's the idea perhaps, but if you notice, the fenders themselves are stamped to accept either configuration, and it just comes down to which headlight bucket's put in there and which surround is applied to it. Now, you could get a V8 in your Rambler back in this period of time, but these have the overhead valve 6-banger. It's a 195.6 cubic inch unit. There was a 1-barrel or a 2-barrel possible. This is the 2-barrel. It's got a bigger bottom, 127 horsepower. And it's a great junkyard cutaway right here. We can see these have coil spring front suspension, and here are the coil spring towers, and here are the springs on convenient display just for us here in the junkyard. You got to wonder at the rust that caused this to pop, and I wonder if there was a moment in time when in the silence of the junkyard we heard pling and this thing fell down. But with that said, the rust has taken its toll. And again, Ramblers at this point in time are unit construction vehicles, so there's no body on frame, so when there's rust in the body, it's rust in the frame, and that's basically terminal. But this is the overhead valve, excuse me, inline 6. There was a flathead also possible on these things, and here's of course the top tank radiator, and of course Rambler was not concerned with low cowl heights and low hood lines, so the top tank radiator was the right tool for the job. GM, by contrast, shortly after these were built, went to side tank radiators, which allowed for a lower grill, lower hood, lower profile. But again, this one here is a 4-door. Again, another 4-door here, and this one again has the single headlights. And let's take a look at this right here. It's kind of cool. This is Rambler for 1960, the new standard of basic excellence. So let's open this thing up. This is a dealer, little sort of newspaper, if you will, and inside, that's George Romney right there. That's the father of politician Mitt Romney. He's the fellow who said in 1960, American Motors, the only race we concern ourselves with is the human race. In other words, Daytona 500, Indy 500, Pomona Winter Nationals. We don't care. We build cars for commuting in, not for drag racing. Of course, that made them a lot of money at this point in time. But by 1967, Rambler was on the brink of bankruptcy, so they finally got hip to the youth market with the Javelin, the AMX, the Scrambler, the Rogue, and saved themselves. But at this point in time, small was big, and it was a good way to sell cars. Now we continue here with really cool pictures in this, and here's the lineup right here. And we can see right here, this is the Rambler 6 Deluxe 4-door, single headlights on that one. Again, $23.50 would get you the quad headlights seen on most of these cars. But if you're a true cheapskate, you would go for the 2 headlight grill. Of course, the wagons, Rambler 6 and Rebel V8, 60's biggest car values. Got to remember, 1960 was the year that Ford came out with the Falcon, Chevy came out with Corvair, Plymouth came out with Valiant, and of course, Studebaker's Lark. So Rambler was not alone, and it was a compact car marketplace battle back in the 1960 year. And here's more. Now these are full-size cars. These are similar, but they ride on a longer wheelbase, the Ambassador. So it's not the same as the smaller Rambler cars. And again, these were called the Rambler Ambassador, but the word Ambassador preempted the word Rambler on these larger cars. And of course, quad headlights were standard on these upscale cars. And at the very end, the caboose, yeah, the little Rambler American. The most imitated car in America, the 60 Rambler American, here in its final styling cycle as the bar of soap. It would go to more of a square body in 1961. Here's the flathead six-banger with the automatic behind it. And again, Rambler Americans were actually outselling these mid-sized Rambler classics here on display. So again, you know, these cars were pretty much the backbone of American Motor sales. Speaking of backbones, this is the rear axle found under these cars. And if you know your Jeep CJ5s or CJ7s, this is the AMC Model 20. In fact, even the AMX used a version of this. Has an 8.8-inch ring gear inside of this cover. This cover is almost ready to rust its way off. Look at that. I've never seen corrosion to where the thing was crimped and bent. The thinner metal right there was the place where the rust took hold. But behind that is a fairly decent, fairly robust differential. Now, the only downside to pre-1967 American Motors products, or 66, is the fact that they had torque tube drive. Now, these cups right here hold the coil springs that would support the axle under the car. These are the radius rods here that connect the axle to the back of the transmission. And right here, this flange is where the torque tube would bolt onto and then feed power or get power fed from the transmission. These were not open drive shaft cars till 67 model year. And the downside to the torque tube configuration is that it makes it harder to hot rod and modify the car, to be honest. And also it's a little harder to get at the drive shaft and replace the universal joints. But again, this Model 20 rear axle right here, seen under AMXs, the Scrambler of 1969, the Machine, the Rebel Machine of 1970, and all of those 401 AMXs. That's it right there, not to mention the V8 CJ5s, CJ7s. So that axle lived a long life. Something kind of weird about the AMC rear axle is the fact that it had one-piece axle shafts that basically, this is the end of the axle shaft that goes all the way inside the differential. This hub presses on, or sometimes floats. This nut and this cotter pin take those off. This hub comes off, and that allows you to remove the drum. Although these little bolts right here also do allow the drum to come off in service. But the only downside here is to get the axle flange off, you almost always need a pulling tool. And beyond that, there's a single keyway inside of this thing. As owners of 401 Javelins and AMXs found out, dump the clutch with a set of slicks, that keyway sometimes sheared and the wheel would just spin, or the axle would spin inside. So the one-piece axle flanges of like the Ford 9-inch, Chrysler 8 3/4, Chevy 10 12 bolt, superior pieces because they don't have that keyway that can shear and cause you all kinds of problems. You'd be walking if that thing fails on one of these cars. But that's the story of the 1960 mid-sized Rambler and how you had to pay $23 more if you wanted the high-tech look of quad headlights. But again, every penny counts when you're in mass production. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to the Steve Maggs YouTube channel and come back tomorrow for more junkyard crawling.